A woman straps her infant to her back with a strip of hide. The band moves into tall grass. Spears in hand, firelight behind them. You expect her to leave the baby somewhere safe and go. She does not. For most of human history, that was not an option. An infant left alone in a hollow while the band foraged would not survive the night. So, she carries him. She works with him pressed against her spine, and nobody asks her to choose between the two. Here is the question this raises. If caregiving meant constant physical contact, every hour, every task, every day, how did anyone get anything done? How did a species with the longest childhood on Earth survive long enough to raise that childhood at all? The answer is not heroic individual mothers gritting their teeth through exhaustion. The answer is that nobody did it alone. Once you see how the system worked, you will recognize pieces of it sitting inside your own chest right now. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy at Harvard University argued in 2009 that humans never raised children as isolated pairs of mother and infant. She called it cooperative breeding. Mothers were the center of care, not the entirety of it. Picture an AKA father in the forests of Central Africa. He carries his infant within arm's reach while he forages, humming low as he walks. A few steps away, the women strip tubers from the ground. When his hands are full, he passes the child to an older sister without a word, without ceremony, like handing off a tool mid-task. That handoff is the whole system in miniature. Ethnographer Nikhil Chaudhary at Cambridge recorded something remarkable among the Mbendjele. In a single day, an infant might receive attention from more than 10 different caregivers, passed lap to lap around the fire while work continued uninterrupted. You might assume a mother alone bore that weight. She did not. Karen Kramer at the University of Utah built models in 2015 showing exactly how this worked at scale. Mothers recruited older children and neighbors whenever solitary care became impossible, which was constantly. The math is simple even if the lived reality was not. When more hands share the load, a mother's energetic cost drops. When her energetic cost drops, she can have another child sooner. This is the engine running underneath everything else in this story. Shared care freed maternal energy. Freed energy meant shorter gaps between births. Shorter gaps meant more children survived to adulthood, and more children survived long enough to need an even longer childhood, which gave human brains the runway to grow as large and as slow as they do. You inherited the output of that engine. The reason you can sit through years of school, years of training, years of figuring out who you are before anyone expects you to provide for yourself, traces back to networks of caregivers who were never one person alone. Fathers were part of that network in ways that might surprise you. Lee Gettler at Northwestern University argued in the journal American Anthropologist in 2009 that men in many forager societies provided direct, hands-on infant care. Not occasional play, not supervision from a distance. Anthropologist Barry Hewlett of Rutgers documented AKA fathers holding infants within arm's reach for hours while work continued around them, with older siblings babysitting in the gaps. That routine cut a mother's energetic load and shortened the time before she could have another child. Population dynamics shifted because fathers showed up. Here is where it gets stranger. Gettler's hormone studies found that testosterone falls in men who take on caregiving, while oxytocin rises. Your body changes chemically when you hold an infant that depends on you. This is not metaphor. It is measurable biology. It likely fired in fathers tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote a word about it. If this still sounds like a story told only through behavior, the ground tells a harder version. Julie Dunn led a biomolecular study at the University of Bristol. It appeared in the journal Nature in 2019. Her team drilled into tiny ceramic vessels recovered from child graves in southern Germany. The vessels take the shape of small animals, with narrow spouts built for pouring liquid into a small mouth. Trapped inside the porous clay, her lab found preserved proteins. Ruminant milk peptides, not residue from a ritual. A chemical signature of something that fed a real child. Archaeologists working the sites, including Katharina Rebay-Salisbury at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, read these vessels as feeding equipment rather than ceremonial objects. Someone shaped clay into the form of an animal. They gave it a narrow spout, then placed it beside a child so that child could keep feeding when a mother's milk fell short on its own. That detail matters more than it first appears. Stable isotope studies from the Kelis Cemetery in Egypt's Dakhla Oasis show a consistent pattern across Neolithic and Roman populations. Supplementary foods began at roughly 6 months. Full weaning was typically complete somewhere between 2 and 3 years. Researchers trace this pattern through both isotopes and dental chemistry, across cemeteries spanning thousands of years. Put the spouted vessels and the isotope data side by side. A single picture emerges. Mothers were not nursing infants for years in isolation, then abruptly cutting them off. They eased the transition with deliberate feeding. Infants stayed close the whole time, carried, fed, and rarely out of reach. That bridge shortened the gap between pregnancies, and a shorter gap meant denser, faster-growing communities. So here is the mechanism in full. Shared caregiving lowered a mother's energy cost. Supplementary feeding shortened how long full nursing needed to continue. Both pulled toward the same outcome. More children survived, and more of them grew up surrounded by hands beyond their mothers alone. You can feel a fragment of this firing inside you right now. The reaction is automatic. When a baby cries near you, your chest tightens before you have decided to react. Your breathing shifts. A hormone cascade begins, the same cascade Gettler measured in caregiving fathers. That reflex did not appear with you. It is the residue of a system that depended on every available adult responding to a child's distress, immediately, without deliberation. Not every society honored that system equally. Historical records show that some ancient groups exposed infants under certain conditions, and exactly why remains genuinely unresolved among researchers. That gap in the evidence is real, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But there is one widespread assumption about ancient parenting that turns out to be flatly wrong. It changes how an entire category of archaeological evidence should be read. Claire McFadden at the Australian National University reanalyzed infant burial samples in 2021, comparing them against United Nations demographic data. For decades, archaeologists treated cemeteries with unusually high numbers of infant graves as evidence of neglect or poor care. McFadden's models showed something else entirely. A growing population will naturally produce more infant graves, even when every one of those infants received good care. In other words, a crowded infant cemetery can be a record of fertility, not failure. For generations, archaeologists read the wrong signal in the dirt. They judged mothers who were almost certainly carrying, feeding, and sharing their children across networks of caregivers. That correction does not erase the open questions. It sharpens what we are looking at. A species that could not have survived its own long childhood without spreading the weight of care across fathers, siblings, neighbors, and strangers willing to take a turn. You carry the proof of that system every time an infant's cry pulls your attention before you choose to give it. It took a village to survive. It still takes one to thrive.